Welcome all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chloe Jury Fogel. I'm on the video team at Jazz at Lincoln Center. It's great to see you. In just a minute, we're going to join Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra trombonist and composer Chris Crenshaw. Chris will be discussing the jazz scene of the 1950s that inspired his amazing recent Blue Engine record release, the 50s, a Prism. I hope you've all had a chance to listen to it. It's really great. After the lesson, Chris will answer questions from you all. I'll jump back in a bit and explain how to ask him a question. In the meantime, if anything comes up, you can go ahead and shoot a question into the chat. I'll open that up for you now. And if we can answer any questions along the way, we'll try and do that. So for now, I'll just turn it over to Chris. And Christopher, you are good to go.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you all joined this masterclass. Thank you for the round of applause, my man. I appreciate you all coming to the class, and this is going to be something that I am looking forward to doing. One, because I've had a part in putting this concert together that we did back in 2017 about the 1950s, and it was a joy to do, and there was obviously a lot of research involved because just of the nature of the piece itself. It's dealing with a time period in the 1950s that was very, very monumental, so to speak. I mean, it was a spectrum of everything from bebop and even beyond there, and swing music was still pretty popular, but bebop was king in the early 50s and going all the way up into 59, where you had the modal / avant-garde kind of thing happening. And this is a golden era. I consider it the golden era of jazz to me, because you're dealing with, I liken it to the 80s, like the golden age of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, where you had all these players that were in their primes, and you had rookies, you had Jordan, you had Magic, you had Larry Bird, you had Dr. J, you had Moses Malone, you had Karl Malone, you had Charles Barkley, John Stockton, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You had guys that were like in different times of their period, and it was just a collaboration of those players, plus the TV contracts that were going on. It was going into live TV instead of, pre-taped, a tape delay, and all of that. So it was like a combination of all these things happening at the same time that made the NBA so great at that time in the 80s. But the 50s, I mean, you had guys like, you had Duke Ellington still doing his thing. He had a rebirth in 56, obviously, with the Newport Jazz Festival, particularly the Wailing Interval that Paul Gonsalves put on there on Diminuendo and Crescendo in Blue. You had the rise of the hard bop period, which was something that was fostered by two greats, Horace Silver and Art Blakey. Those two together started the Jazz Messengers, and Art Blakey went on to continue the Jazz Messengers, but Horace Silver got quintets, used youngsters that were up and coming, and brought on a whole school of thought that you can bring on. And that was around the time, around 1955, 56, where rock and roll was starting to permeate the airwaves in the United States. So folks like Ray Charles, folks like the late great Little Richard, Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, and all those type of guys like that, you're starting to hear a lot of that, a lot of jazz coming into R&B. You hear a lot of R&B coming into jazz. And even country music started coming into jazz. Everything just started melting and meshing together. And I just wanted to highlight a few of those subgenres in jazz that made the 50s just what it was. I mean, I could start at the bebop period, where it was a continuation of what was happening in the 40s with Thelonious Monk, folks like Lee Konitz, folks like Charlie Parker, obviously, and Dizzy Gillespie. They were coming up with this new. And before then, 40s and 30s, we had the swing era, you had the jazz age, you had the New Orleans type of music, where most of the music at that time was danceable. And you could argue that some of the music in the 50s was danceable too. But Gillespie and Parker and Monk were all on the same wavelength. I mean, to an extent, you know, Monk still played slowly, but Monk still contributed in a way that everybody learned from him about the stylings of what bebop was all about. He didn't even call it bebop, the genius of modern music, but still, the music was faster, the music was higher in terms of range and all of that, and pretty, you can think of it as strong too, especially on the East Coast. And Charlie Parker used a lot of what he learned from Lester Young, and if you speed up Lester Young, it sounds like Charlie Parker. If you slow down Charlie Parker, it sounds like Lester Young. And just a lot of the innovations that he came up with, the Schenkerian method, where you would start a phrase like, let me see, turn it up. You know, he would go up and down. And jump the octave. Like he would do things like that, Charlie Parker would. Like take a phrase and play chromatically or play linearly, but then he would like drop down the octave or go up the octave and complete the phrase like that. So those are a lot of things that Bird was doing. Dizzy Gillespie obviously was trying to use the Afro-Latin influence. I'll talk about that a little later when I talk about the cha-cha that I wrote. But the first piece that I ended up writing was a piece called Flipped His Lid. I just looked up colloquialisms from the 1950s and just came up with that title because that would indicate that the music was changing, the scene was changing, or the music was so radical to the point where you would think that people were going crazy with the stuff that they were writing, especially people like, I already mentioned Bird and Diz, but people like Lenny Tristano, people like Lee Konitz, people like Warren Marsh, you know, were also, there were two separate styles of bebop. And so Charlie Parker and them had that, he had that thing, and Lenny Tristano and Lee Konitz were coming out of it was a way of writing intervallically, but they would like take a standard, something like All the Things You Are, and they would mess with the melody a little bit, rearrange it, and take that melody and rearrange it, and then take that melody, rearrange it, do it about 9 or 10 times before you come up with something different. And you really had to listen to the tune to realize this is something I haven't heard before, and it's something that I can't recognize. But if you listen to the harmonies, the chord progressions, and it could tell you, oh, that's All the Things You Are. But it just has a abstract melody to it, you know. But it also went into a way, and some people thought it was like a mathematical jazz, you know. So some people gravitated towards it, some people didn't. But that's the great thing about jazz. That's the great thing about art. To each his own, you know. So I'm gonna take time and I'm gonna play a little bit of my Flipped His Lid from the Prism album. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this up, and here we go. So you can just hear some of the devices that I used. I used a little bit of what Charlie Parker and the bebop cats used, the interval of the tritone. I used a little bit of that. So you hear, if you listen to bebop music, that interval, the tritone, is very, very prevalent. So that's something that you can listen for. A lot of the isms that Dizzy Gillespie used, you hear that in the intro. It's like you're announcing yourself. It's like you're announcing that the melody is coming. And so you hear a lot of the first time, and then you hear, I changed it a little bit. So you really have to just listen really carefully. And then as far as the progression goes, the progression, I start on an F7, the tune is in the key of F, but I started with, if you're familiar with harmony, I kind of started with I started with the F7, but I have the 9th and I have the sharp 11. So it ends up being an F7 sharp 11. So I started like that. That's the first chord of the melody. And I also just built the melody off of that particular sound. you know, so I liken it to something that Tristano would do, kind of like change the harmony up a little bit. And then the progression obviously goes to B flat 7, B flat 7, then I go to an F minor. And then I do some 2 5s, but it's going in a different direction, obviously. So it'll be better heard than me just talking about it, trying to, you know, spell it out. So here is flipped his lid. Okay. Okay, so that was the melody of that tune, and some things that you heard in there were some devices that a lot of the cats used in the bebop era, like for instance, the trumpet and alto front line. You heard 2 voices that were matched the same, they playing in unison, they kind of have the same pitches, but the way that the overtones lie on an E flat saxophone and a B flat trumpet provide like a 3rd octave above that, and it almost sounds like a whistle. So if you go back and listen to a lot of the tunes that Diz and Bird played together, or any combination that has alto and trumpet in the front line, Jackie McLean and Art Farmer on Cool Strutting, that might be a good example. The Adderley brothers, Cannonball and Nat Adderley. You go back and listen and you hear them playing in the same pitch, the same octaves playing in unison. And you kind of hear that 3rd whistle, like a whistling effect, as you as the melody is being played. Another good example of that is if you go and listen to Roy Haynes's "Birds of a Feather." It's an album that came out, I think, in the early 2000s, I believe, with Roy Hargrove and Kenny Garrett, and they play Moose to Mooch together. You can really hear it there. It's really very noticeable. But another device that you heard was, I kind of did something that Train did on Locomotion or Training In, is using the blues and then putting a bridge in it. It's like a blues with a bridge. So the bridge kind of moves around in an atypical fashion that you would hear. So it's almost like a different song, but it relates in some sort of way. Okay, so that's another device that I ended up using on that. Another device that I thought about on the shout chorus of this is the way that Max Roach would play the drums. And so you hear Ali Jackson on this particular recording try to play the drums as a melodic instrument instead of just a timekeeping instrument. It was thought back in times in the 40s, even before then, that the drums couldn't be a melodic instrument. You know, they were considered, I won't say the word, but it were considered that, inferior, so to speak. They were like an inferior voice because drummers, all they can think of is they can't read music. They can just, they just hit stuff. But Max Roach wanted to put that thought to bed. And so he did that with a lot of his records that he did with Clifford Brown, a lot of the records that he did with himself. And so now I'm gonna find the shout chorus of this and play it. Should be coming up pretty soon. So what you're gonna hear is you're gonna hear the shout chorus of a high melody, high instrument, and a voice. that's what happened in that regard. So the first two A's, so this is an A tune. Okay, so the first two sections sound alike. Then the next section, the bridge, kind of sounds different. And then the A section sounds just like the A sections of before. So in the A sections, I had Ali playing with us, the lower instruments. And then in the B section, the bridge, I had Ali playing with the higher instruments. So he's playing those same rhythms. And then go back to the A section, he comes back in and plays with us. Okay, so that's just a few of the devices that I use. And obviously you heard the melody being so esoteric. It's like, oh, what is going on here? I got two voices going on at the same time, and it doesn't sound related, but it does sound related a little bit. So that's probably more of the Tristano influence inside that tune. And speaking of that, I'm gonna play just a little bit of the late great Lee Konitz. I'm gonna play a little bit of this tune called Palo Alto that he wrote. And you can hear just the influence of the lines just weaving. It's kind of intervallic. It's not linear. It's not da 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 da. It's not real linear like that. It's more like da 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 da, like stuff like that. Not necessarily like a computer, because there's humans playing it and they know what they're doing. Okay, so here is Palo Alto. Okay, so that was Lee Konitz's Palo Alto, and you hear it's based on the tune "Strike Up the Band," and but you really couldn't hear "Strike Up the Band." Maybe one because I told you that it's based on "Strike Up the Band," but if you listen to the chord progression, it's like, oh, okay, is that? And here's another tune called "Marshmallow" that's based on Cherokee. And there's other tunes out there that they did, and it just based it on contrafacts. Basically, that's what it's called, contrafact. And so there's a lot of those out there that you can check out at your own leisure. So that was the influence of that one. Flipped his lid. He's gone crazy. He's gone mad. He's flipped his lid. It's something that you would hear in the 50s sitcom or something like that. Okay. And then the second tune, Just a Sliding, that comes out of two periods. With this music of the 50s show, I had to combine, because I had 6 tunes to do in a span of 40 some odd minutes. But I had to really do some combinations of some things. And I thought that on Just a Sliding, that the combination of J.J. Johnson and Kai Winding, along with the hard bop period of Horace Silver and Art Blakey, I thought those would really mesh together. And so I came up with the tune Just a Sliding, just to give our trombonists, Vincent Gardner and Elliot Mason, a chance to do their thing on it. And this genre, the hard bop genre, was something that I love to do, because it was close to the era, well, not era, but it's close to the music that I grew up listening to and playing at some point. I'm talking about the music of the church. I'm talking about the R&B music. I'm talking about the music towards rock and roll. So a lot of the jazz musicians that were coming up in that time were playing in what they call, R&B bands. So they would do the jive, the wailing, and all of that type of stuff, the growling and the grunting and everything coming through the horns. They would do that thing, but also, John Coltrane's a prime example. You hear him playing on Castle Rock with Johnny Hodges. That was also in the 1950s. And so Johnny had gone off with Duke Ellington and left the orchestra to go on and do his own thing in the 50s. And a lot of that stuff that he did was predicated towards stuff that was quote unquote rock and roll. And so with that being said, like a lot of the music was, like I said, meshing together. Like I said earlier in the presentation. So you heard things like gospel singers, maybe something like this group called the Southern Tones, and you would hear the way that, and the progressions in hard bop music, and the progressions, well, most hard bop music, but the progressions kind of came from church. So a lot of songs that you would sing in church, you would hear those chord progressions in R&B tunes. And one example of that is the Southern Tones. They sing a song called "It Must Be Jesus," and in some sort of way, it kind of it's a simple progression, and I'm just going to share just a little bit of what that sounds like, and then as you listen to it, then you're going to say, that sounds familiar. So here's this.
Oh, there's a man going around. Must be Jesus. Must be Jesus. Oh, yes. Must be Jesus. There's a man going around. Must be Jesus. Taking names. Oh, Lord. Must be Jesus. No, he took my mother's name. My mother's name. And it left my heart in pain. My heart in pain. My heart in pain. There's a man going around.
And if you think it sounds familiar, it's because it does. You see it right there on the page. Listen.
Well, I got a woman way over town that's good to me. Oh, yeah. Say, I got a woman way over town, good to me. Oh, yeah. She give me money when I'm in need. Yeah, she's a kind of friend indeed. I got a woman way over town that's good to me. Oh, yeah.
So there's a good example of, you know, R&B going into gospel, and gospel going into R&B. They kind of shared that same type of, like I said, they shared the same progression. And you also hear the blues influence. You hear all that kind of stuff in there. Woo! All that kind of, you know, that kind of sound. And in a way, it permeated itself into jazz. And so you would hear tunes that also had gospel influence. Here's one, is actually a couple that I can think of. Here's one from like Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho, but it's done in a way that it's kind of like, of course there's moaning. And that's also a human element that you can put into your music as well, okay? But here is Rosetta Tharpe, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, that's gonna do her thing on Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho. And I just want you to listen to the way that it kind of sounds like a hard bop piece that was written for Blue Note Records.
At the Battle of Jericho, Jericho. Jericho, Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho. You know the walls come tumbling down. Well, Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You may talk about your bonds of Gilead, talk about your man of woe, but none like good old Joshua way round the walls of Jericho. Well, Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, well, Jericho. Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho. You know the walls come tumbling down. Well, good old.
You kind of hear that influence. You got to hear that drive that we have in gospel music. It's from the hand clapping, the foot stomping. So that's the feeling that I want to create. And here's another example by the original Five Blind Boys of Alabama, Old Time Religion. And you really hear it in this.
Oh, give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. And it's good. Good enough for me. Yeah, got that old time religion. Time religion. Old time religion. That good religion. Old time religion. Oh, good religion. Old time religion. Falling in my bones. Old time religion. That good religion. Old time religion. All in my head. Old time religion. That good religion. Old time religion. I got it in my hand. Old time religion. Falling in my feet side. That good religion. Old time religion. And it's good. Good enough for me. Good enough for me.
You really hear it in that. And so now you're asking, where does JJ and Kai fit into all of this? Well, you heard the call and response that you just heard on the Old Time Religion by the Five Blind Boys of Alabama. So a lot of what JJ Johnson and them did, they did like a lot of shout choruses where they would have stop time. That's going back to the 20s and 30s, where you would have a stop time and you would, you know, do your thing over that, and to show that you know where you are and what you're doing. And so JJ Johnson and Kai Winding would play in thirds together. You know, they kind of had that thing, and it almost kind of went into a way of the counterpoint that you hear in Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, and also with other groups. But here's a little bit of the sound that I was going for with JJ Johnson and Kai Winding with Bone of Contention. This is Bone of Contention from Afternoon in Birdland. Just to get a little bit of that sound in your ear, just to know where they were coming from. They formed that group in, I think, around 1954, and they put out, I mean, actually, I think they did something even before then, like around 1950. There was Jay and Kai on Savoy, and they have a lot of albums together that they put together with like Jay and Kai plus 6. They had Jay and Kai at Birdland, Jay and Kai at Newport, and Jay and Kai Enough Said, the great Kai and JJ on Impulse. That was in 1960. There's a lot of great albums of those two playing together. And I think that might have formed when they did the 4 Trombones debut with Benny Green, Willie Dennis, Kai Winding, and JJ Johnson, Charles Mingus. You can find that as well. You can really check out. But here's just a little of just a slide. And I'm going to start it at the shout chorus after Ali Jackson's solo. I'm going to start it there so you can hear that stop time that I was talking about with that they do sometimes on their records. So, it goes back to the call and response that you heard with Five Blind Boys of Alabama. There's a lot of that goes on with, in, you know, the call and response, to the spirit, all of that stuff. So here's the shout chorus of just a slide and going into the melody, and then you can hear. And I'm also going to talk about a little progression that we do sometimes when we're at home at church. That's a little different. So. Okay. So that was the end of that. And you heard the progression that goes to the 3 chord. You know, it goes to the 3 chord, and then it goes to the 4. And then it goes to the 1. You know, so it goes from the 3 chords, which is kind of atypical, but we do it sometimes at home all the time. You know, we do. You know, we do something like that, and then all of a sudden we go to the 3rd. You know, we go to the 3rd, and then we go to the 4, and then we go home. You know, something like that. That's a little different, but it's something that I always heard growing up at church, so I just thought I'd put it in. Okay. Moving on to Conglomerate. Conglomerate was something that was written for in the style of Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker, had a lot of counterpoint in there. And counterpoint is basically where you have 2 or more musicians and they're playing phrases, melodies, and it kind of harkens back to the New Orleans front line of the trombone, trumpet, and clarinet, where you have all of this. It sounds like commotion, you know, it's playing all this. You got trombone, and you got the clarinet up top. That kind of thing. And it's all going on at the same time. And you're thinking, they're just playing a bunch of noise. No, everybody has a role. See, the trumpet plays in the middle, the trombone plays on the bottom, and the clarinet plays on the top, okay? But in this case, with Jerry Mulligan's piano-less quartet, see, there's a reason why they play the way that they do. It's kind of like interweaving things going like this, but it's still going like this together. It's that way because there was no piano, so they had to come up with the harmonies themselves. So it's another challenge. They had to know the song that they're playing. They had to know the form of the song in order to demonstrate what the melodies were as they were composing on the spot. Okay, somebody would play the melody, and then somebody would probably either play a counter melody below that or above it. And it would just sound like, you know, at some points they come together, but it sounds like they were kind of looking for each other without, you know, seeing what the other person's thinking. So that's a challenge in itself as well. And I'm just gonna play a little bit of the melody since we're running out of time a little bit. I'm just gonna play a little bit of the melody of Conglomerate, which has that influence. If you listen to Chet Baker, he plays in the lower register of the horn. Paul Netzella or Jerry Mulligan or any baritone saxophone playing during that time, it's playing in this part. And so it has a West Coast light feel. You notice everything has been in your face, hard stuff. This is kind of laid back a little bit. So I'm just gonna play a little bit of this for you. And away we go. So that was Conglomerate, but we went into a little bit of Reunion by Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, which is another contrafact that we talked about with the bebop period. So that's a tune that was based on There Will Never Be Another You. So you can hear the progression going on the bottom. And that's one thing that I like about music in itself. And you have the foundation, which is laid out by the harmony. And then with the top of it, you can put whatever you want to put on it. And whether it's good, whether it's bad, it can sound good or whether it can sound bad. So for instance, I could have this chord on the bottom, and then I could put on the top, and I can make music out of that. So that's a good way to talk about that. Moving on to the cha-cha that I wrote. This is actually like a last resort. I was done with the whole suite. I thought I was okay. I wrote 5, that's it. And then all of a sudden I thought, let me see if I can add one more to it. And I was scared to write it because I didn't want to disrespect the culture. So I thought about everything that I was taught before then. I had some good friends. Carlos Enriquez obviously is a good source. And I had sources even before then with my schooling at Valdosta State, a guy named Edgar Durantes, who was very, very instrumental. He's a pianist, and he taught me about son clave, rumba clave, all the different grooves, and like a danson, a mambo, the rumba, and there's obviously others, and in every country there's different things that they really, really highlight, like the choro in Brazil, I believe, and so there's a lot of music out there that's to be checked out. But I wanted to highlight the era of the big three. The big three being Machito, Tito Rodriguez, and Tito Puente. And a lot of the dances that they did in the Palladium. There was a club on 53rd and Broadway that everybody came to, and everybody did their thing and learned the latest dances from that. So I wanted to really just highlight the spirit of that. But at the same time, I wanted to add in a little bit of big band thing here with some clarinet leading the woodwind section like Duke Ellington would have them do. Because obviously big bands were still pretty prevalent during the time, even though you kind of like died out a little bit with the sound, with the different sounds coming, but the big band was still present. Duke Ellington was still doing his thing, the New Testament was doing his thing, the Count Basie Orchestra. He had a lot of that going on. So just a little bit of what I was trying to come up with, just a little bit of an influence. Machito is a tune called Conversation. And then I'll go into my my cha-cha, Toda la Noche. right. So, and then you obviously have other sections that are going on with that. So we go on that all day, but so those were two influences for that particular tune, and you would hear in the rest of the chart how all that plays out. If you get the album, it's out. So here's Unorthodox Sketches. This is the fifth title on the album, and it actually came out of the third stream type of. I was trying to deal with third stream modal to like Miles Davis. I'm thinking Stan Kenton. I'm thinking Gil Evans. I'm thinking even a composer named Alonzo Levister. If you listen to the tune "Slow Dance" from John Coltrane's "Training In," that's one of my favorite ballads. You could actually hear a version of Alonzo Levister's "Slow Dance." You can find it on YouTube with their group doing it, and Max Roach is on drums. I forget who else is on it, but if you check that out, you kind of get a sense of what I was going for with this. So I wrote 5. You only hear 4 on the album, but I wrote 5 individual sketches of tunes, like little short tunes that had backgrounds that were kind of sounded like, like My Ship, or something that kind of sounds like the Sketches of Spain type of deal, or something like a Charlie Parker with strings, Donald Byrd with strings, Clifford Brown with strings. So I wanted to have something along the lines of that, but the movement of it was what we call modal, in which we are playing on modes and not necessarily harmonies. And so I wanted to create that kind of atmosphere for each person. And so that's why you hear 4 individual tunes on that particular one. And to kind of go with the vibe of what I was trying to do, I'm gonna play a little bit of Charles Mingus. There's a tune that he wrote called Portrait. And Alonzo Levister loved it so much. That was in 1951, by the way. And so they were doing all of this chamber music even back then. And so Levister took that tune and did another version of it with strings and with all the luscious instruments that you would hear with Thad Jones. And it's on I'm gonna just play just a little bit of it, and then I'm gonna go into just a part of my Unorthodox Sketches. So let me see, share screen. Boom, boom. All right, so here we go. Of that, so here's a little bit of Unorthodox Sketches. It goes from one to the next to the next to the next, but I'm just going to play the last part of it, which is Paul's bass clarinet feature, which has the you can hear Marcus Prentup leading the trombones with the flugelhorn, and we're in bucket mute, so you can hear a little bit of that with the harmony mutes of the trumpet. So that was just a little snippet of Unorthodox Sketches, and that's towards the end. And just for the last one, I really don't have to go into too much detail about this one. Ornette Coleman, I'm thinking Ornette Coleman all the time with this pursuit of the new thing. You know, it was all about playing phrases together, and it's all about being atypical, you know, going away from the time, kind of going away from harmonies, trying to go away from, so there's no piano in this one as well. So there's a lot of starts and stops, and there's a lot of uneven phrases. So there's a lot of things that kind of like make you think a little bit, kind of like, wait, that was unexpected, but I like it. You know, it was still predicated towards the blues. It was predicated towards making harmonies and melodies and whatnot. So just a little bit of this tune Ornette Coleman wrote called Crossroads, and then just a little bit of my tune, The Pursuit of the New Thing. Just a little bit, little sliver. Somebody got it. All right, so that's just a little bit of that. It goes on for a longer period of time, but it's, you know, it's all about that creation, that spontaneity at that point. It's about who can get who, and the surprise and everything. The drums have a good part to do with that. If you listen to Ornette's stuff from '59 going into that avant-garde period, you hear a lot of drums being in there. Billy Higgins really had fun with this period. And so that's the album. That's basically the album, the 50s, a prism. I thought of a prism because it's with, you know, when light goes into a prism, it refracts the spectrum, the colors of the rainbow. And also thought about a program that I went to called the Georgia Governor's Honors Program when I was in high school. They had 2 Prism concerts, and you would have an act go on stage, you have another act after that go up on like the balcony, like different parts of the auditorium. There would be different acts going back to back to back to back to back. So that's what led me to choose the Prism as far as describing what the 50s was like to me. So I hope you all enjoyed that session. I know we probably have some time for a few questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we can probably go to 5:15 or so since it's Friday. We don't have another class coming in after us. So before we get into that, I just want to say, if anyone's just joining us or joined us late, this is a master class by Chris Crenshaw from the Lincoln Center Orchestra. Just a minute now, I guess Chris is going to start answering some questions from you all. I just want to take this moment to give a huge thanks to our supporters who help us serve the global jazz community. We wouldn't be here without you. Your support means so much to us. So to open it up to questions, if you would like to use the raise hand function to speak with Chris directly, go ahead and do that. Just click the participants tab and then the raise hand button. Please make sure that your name is your first and last name. It just helps me call on you so you don't have like an awkward username. You can change your name in the participants tab, but press the rename button. I'll unmute you when it's your turn to speak with Chris, so don't worry about unmuting it or muting yourself. And if you do have a question but you want to shoot it into the chat, I'll also be looking into the chat. I see there are a couple questions in there already. So maybe while people are gathering the courage to raise their hands, we can attack some of these questions from the chat. So go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. But Chris, it seems like there's a question in the chat from a couple people. So this one is from Annabella. She wants to know, when you put together a tune where you have two of the same instrument playing in thirds and or counterpoint, what is your goal? To make it sound like one person is orchestrating it, or to bring out both musicians' individual styles?
Well, the challenge in that is trying to be yourself inside of a structure. And so when you're doing two like musicians or two like instruments, like two trumpets, you really want to try to make that trumpet sound like one. So you have to follow somebody. So you all have to just make that creative decision as to say, who am I going to follow? Am I going to, go by what they do, or am I going to, lead the way? So somebody has to really just do that. And sometimes it's more evident than others. Like if someone's more experienced or knows what they're doing, then you try to kind of follow what it is that they're doing. And, you have to give a little bit of yourself up in order to make that happen. And when you're playing two different parts, it's matching the style, matching the tone, matching the spirit, but then at the same time putting your own spin on what the harmony should be. Like say if you come up on a blues note, then maybe you want to put a little something in it to make it sound a little better, then you can do that as well. But for the most part, it's all about just playing, because remember, you're playing rhythms together, and that goes a different way. You have to think about playing the instrument just like you're playing drum. So if you're playing all these different rhythms on top of the person, then the person's gonna be looking at you like, dude, you stepping on my toes, or girl, you stepping on my toes. Like, chill, calm down a little bit, give me some space, okay? So you have to look at the equation like you have to look at it as space. You gotta think about kind of, bringing that space together and playing inside of where that space is. Like find your way in and kind of weave your way in and out of that space. And so you can all make music together instead of, playing like this and, it just sounds like noise. You have to find a way to kind of play like this, kind of like a web, like there are holes in the web that you can try to maneuver your way through.
Awesome. Thank you, Annabella, for your question. The next question, also from the chat, comes from Samantha. She says, hi, Chris. When you were talking about the form of Flip His Lid, you mentioned that you added a bridge to the blues like Charlie Parker did in Locomotion. In her jazz band, they were playing Nancy Joe, which they identified as bird blues, as with a bridge in an AABA form. Is that how you wrote Flip His Lid, or is it just a bird blues?
Nancy Joe. That's a that's a tune. Nancy Joe was a tune that was written by Gerald Wilson, the late great Gerald Wilson. I had 3 opportunities to work with him while I was my first couple of years in New York, and he wrote this tune. Matter of fact. Something like that, but the harmony kind of changes a little bit. But there's a part in there that I forgot how it goes, but the changes are like I remember some of the shout chords going like. So in that part, the that part right there is what I refer to as the stop time. Somebody asked a question about stop time. So that's when the music stops, and then there's a melody or something or solo being played in that space. and you're like, there's like a moment of truth. You all by yourself, so you got to do what you got to do, or else, you know, you find somebody else to do it. But yeah, that can be considered a bird blues. This one happens to have 16 measures in it, but in the bridge. But the bird blues that I played and training in is only 8 bars. So yeah, you can consider that a bird blues. You can consider it like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Samantha, for your question. Guys, don't be shy. Let's see some more hands, some more questions in the chat. I'm also monitoring Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to put a question in the comments. All right, our next question comes from Andy Sachs. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Chris, what's good, man?
What's good?
Hey, I got to tell you, first off, this overall piece that you put together with Prism, it's got to be my favorite so far that I've heard. I mean, good stuff coming out of you guys always, but this is definitely standout stuff, man. Yeah, dude. Hey, my question is, when you're composing something like this, and I'm just talking about all the pieces together, how often, if at all, do you take that stuff back to the band and get feedback from the different sections and different players? You know, when you're writing pieces for different people, I understand it's probably a best practice to kind of, okay, I'm doing this part for this guy, I'm doing this part for this guy. How often do you actually take it back to them and let them play through it and get feedback from them?
All the time. I mean, Sherman Irby got with me. He's our lead alto player. He got with me the other day and asked me, was something out of range, or could we play something that it was like a portamento that trombones can do, but you only have to do it with your lip. You can't really do it with the whole slide because we only have 7 positions. So we had to do something where they have to like buzz with our lip, with something like that. But it would have broken into some partials, so we had to like pivot off our lip a little bit. But we always ask questions. I mean, we pick each other's brains all the time, even during rehearsals. Like, yo, can you play this braid? And sometimes we would, sometimes somebody would play something in the section, and just to play around, and somebody would ask, or I know Sherman for sure, we had, hey, can you play that again? And they're like, no, I'm not gonna do that, because then they end up writing it into the part.
Right.
You know? So it makes for some good conversation, makes for some good laughs, but we always pick each other's brain. We have to know who we're writing for and what instrument we're writing for and the capabilities of those instruments. Like the clarinet is always getting on us most of the time, because we write what's this note and this note, a concert A flat and a concert A natural, which is their concert B flat and their concert B natural. But the way that it's fingered, it's like you're going from one system to a whole different system. So it's like you're crossing that break, and it's very, very, it's crazy. It's almost like us playing, the trombones playing this B flat in first position, and then the B natural is in 7th position. So that's like one small step for man, but it's like one giant leap for trombone kind, you know? So it's good to really just know more about each instrument, and always just try, like trial and error, so to speak. And the more that you can know, then the better that you can write for those type of folks. So yeah, we have those conversations all the time.
I appreciate it, man. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for listening. All right, let's go to a question from Les Rose. Hey, Les.
Hey,
What's happening?
Chris.
Yo.
I hope you were at the concert in 2018 in Santa Barbara, the Spaces concert. The band was incredible then. And a very proud moment for me, being there with all of my high school students, being a band director in that area. And it was particularly great seeing all of you guys after the concert in the kind of meet and greet area, and how gracious all of you were, particularly with the students. Just standing back and watching was really a source of pride. So thank you so much for that. Quick question about the arrangers and composers that we know that arranged and composed for their specific bands throughout history, as opposed to the arrangers and composers that just
wrote for everybody, and where you see yourself in this whole mix. And if you have time for a teeny tiny second question, since you brought up Bob Brookmeyer, I'd love to hear your take on the valve trombone and its place or not in trombone sections. So have at it.
Yeah, my place in the in terms of arranging and composing, there's been some times where I've had to do transcriptions and do arrangements for Broadway shows. Shuffle Along comes to mind. That was derived from the Cotton Club Parade that we did a few years back. And that ended up turning into a Tony Award nomination. There's another one, I forget the other one, that Darryl Waters actually hired me to do some of that stuff. So it's been good to, do things outside of jazz, and jazz really helped me, be able to have that platform. And so, reaching out to others is one thing that we always try to do, whether it's with Jazz at Lincoln Center or myself, because I have on my business cards giving back to him 100%. So he gave me something, so I do all I can to give back in that sort of way. And I'm still finding myself and, just trying to, branch and do things that will help the music, because the music is bigger than all of us. And any profession that you do, whatever it is that you do, is bigger than the person themselves. So I always take that approach. And in terms of the second question, which was about
the valve trombone.
Valve trombone, right. Bob Brookmeyer, the master of the minor ninths. Master of the minor ninths, a great composer and arranger in his own right. Most of the time, we try to be biased about trombone players being great arrangers and composers, but it's true. You look at him, you look at Slide Hampton, you look at Ron Teasdale, you look at J.J. Johnson, you look at Curtis Fuller, you look at Bill Russo, you look at cats like that, and you got guys that can really, really write and arrange. But in terms of the valve instrument, valve trombone, it has a place. Not in so many places because I don't really see it. It's more, they call it a novelty instrument. But I thought it was very useful when Juan Tiso used it in Duke Ellington's orchestra in terms of playing with doubling, and not necessarily doubling, but just playing in sections with the saxophones and with the trumpets, just because you can keep up. And so you hear it in that, it uses that, used in that way. And in terms of just the instrument itself, I know it helped me a whole lot when I was Wycliffe Gordon, when I was at Juilliard. He recommended that I go to a valve instrument so I can concentrate less on slide movement and concentrate on the embouchure, because I was doing some funky things with my embouchure. And so just allowing me to not even just think about this, so to speak, let me concentrate on what I was doing here. And so it helped me reset and really just focus on my embouchure, what I was doing, what I need to go from one parcel to the next, my slurring and my technique and all of that stuff. So that, it helped me just as a, what you call, not necessarily a rehab type of thing, but it was just a, something that helped me focus on that. So when I got back to it, I could play the trombone a whole lot easier.
Very interesting, very interesting. And by the way, I just want to say, I continue to be impressed by the continuity of all the classes that you guys have been offering. Seton did a wonderful, detailed look and listen to Ornette Coleman's music, which prepared me beautifully to listen to that, even that small sample of what you played. Otherwise, I might not have gotten it, but having that background and then listening to your clip, bravo to you guys. Keep it up. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure Seton wants to thank you as well. How about it, Seton?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been lurking in the background, but I'm here too. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Les. And thanks, Les, for always being part of these. Thanks for your question on Alexa's show last night, too. That was a great question, and we always love seeing the regulars. It makes us feel good. All right, guys, we have time for maybe one more question if anyone has anything else. In the meantime, I'll just say that we will be continuing to host these live events throughout the coming weeks. More masterclasses, more conversations, question and answer sessions with Wynton. We got live performances. Next masterclass will be part 2 of Ted Nash's Wayne Shorter celebration. If anyone was there last week, we got started with Wayne talking as a sideman, and Ted will now go over Wayne's work as a band leader and explore some of his most indelible contributions to music. That will be live on Monday, May 18th at this same time on Zoom and on Facebook. For a full list of all of our upcoming events, please tune in to our website at Jazz at Lincoln Center's online hub at jazz.org. And thanks again to everyone for being a part of this community. If it's within your means, please consider making a donation. Any amount counts, truly. We are a nonprofit organization in New York City, and this time has sort of affected us just as it has affected many other organizations. And we're going to continue to be here for you guys, but your help means so much to us. So thanks to anyone who's already made a contribution. It's so meaningful and we're so grateful. So I don't see any more questions. If you want to check out more stuff, feel free to follow us on social medias. That's Jazz Lincoln Center on Facebook and jazz.org on Instagram and Twitter. Let me check the Facebook. All right, if there are no more questions, I'll just turn it over to Chris for some last words before we say goodbye.
Yeah, feel free to go in and check out the music of the 1950s. I mean, obviously, we didn't really get to a whole lot of everything today, but I'm sure I covered a whole lot. But there's more out there that needs to be, recognized, because like I said in the beginning, this is that's the golden era of jazz to me. Dave Brubeck, Time Out, Miles Davis is kind of blue. Charles Mingus from 1950 all the way up until 1959. I mean, I remember Lawrence Schoenberg he was a teacher of mine, a jazz history teacher, and such a great guy to work with. He gave me one of my first gigs in New York City. And I remember the first day that we got to the school and took a jazz history class, he had Ellington, Monk, and Mingus, like in a crossword type of deal. And he had those 3 composers on the board. And he said, like, those 3 are considered the greatest composers in jazz. And I had to sit and think about that for a minute. And he was right. Those guys paved the way and also continue to contribute. So those 3 alone, I mean, there's so many more. We talked about Wayne Shorter. Of course, he got his start there with Maynard Ferguson and went on to do great things and still doing great things. And so always go out and check out the music. Don't be closed-minded about it. Try to get a little appreciation of what the avant-garde was about. George Russell, any of the genres. Just, try to be open-minded. It'll help you in the long run. Just like in this life, just try to open your mind to different things and try to go outside that box. And so I thank you. I thank Chloe. I thank Seton. I thank Jazz at Lincoln Center, Jazz Academy, everyone that's given us this platform to showcase our talent and showcase the education. That's part of our mission, to enrich, entertain, and to educate. So we thank you and hope y'all have a good day. Continue to listen to the music, continue to take care of it. Like Chloe said, if you feel free to give a donation to Jazz at Lincoln Center, go to jazz.org, drop off a little donation, help, just help the community. It's not just us, it's the whole community. Because if we get help, then we can help others. So we appreciate it. Take care. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that. And thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you on Monday, if not sooner. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.